Right then, so moving on to the main job of the evening. I'll be covering this project that was carried out at one of our demonstration farms, Pantyderi. Pantyderi is in North Pembrokeshire, between the Preseli Hills and the sea. And it's one of 18 demonstration farms we have in Wales. And if you're not aware of the work that we do on them, it's all recorded on the website with Farming Connect. So it's well worth, we've been working with these farms now for 3 to 4 years. So it's well worth looking at the work that we've accomplished. And I'll only be telling you about one farm tonight. So, farm facts. There's 450 hectares over 2 units and off-lying land as well. About 60 hectares of cereals. There's 80 suckler cows put to a Limousin bull. And they also buy in 300 or more store cattle annually for fattening, and also 1,800 ewes. So the projects we've been involved in carrying out there, the aim of Wynne and Eirig Jones, the farmers, when they first started with Farming Connect, was to make the farm more efficient and sustainable for the future. So the first project we carried out was soil mapping and zoning, 150 hectares altogether we've done now. And we wanted to do this to see if we could provide a more efficient way of putting nutrients on. So that's just an example at the side there of the soil maps that were generated. That is soil type on the top one, and the bottom one is a soil pH in the same field. So we carried out project spreading lime by variable rate, and we did actually save £1,000 over 100 hectares by doing it variable rate rather than flat rate. So we weren't putting lime on where it wasn't required, and we were putting more on where it was required. Then we also carried out a project sowing barley using variable seed rate, increasing it in the poorer performing parts of the field, like the headlands, and the overall grain yield went up 8% by doing that. Pantyderi has participated in the Yen grain nutrient benchmarking for the last 2 seasons, and that has been quite interesting. We're not quite sure what we got out of it. The first year tended to show that nitrogen use was maybe a little generous. This year it was more a case of manganese and molybdenum being low trace elements. And then the other project we've been working on for actually 3 years is to become self-sufficient in beef feed. So the beef feeding system at Pantyderi is grass silage, crimped barley, and protein concentrate. They have a mixed feed wagon with weigh sails on it, normally 2 rations, a grower ration and a finishing ration. And the first year we worked on increasing the silage protein to 16%. We did manage to make silage that was 16.5% protein, with a bit of attention to sampling the grass from sort of second week of May onwards and cutting it earlier, basically. So we managed to do that, thinking, oh, maybe we can get away without buying a protein concentrate in. But despite treating the crimped barley with urea soy pellets to produce alka grain, the nutritionist involved, Heaven Richards of Rumination, found that the animals still needed 1 kilo to 1.5 kilos per head per day of protein blend. And that was the cheapest we could make it, was a blend of rapeseed and maize or wheat distillers. So we thought, what about if we could grow a concentrated source of protein? And in choosing the crop, the demands we had were, it had to be suitable for the feeding system on the farm, suitable for balancing silage and barley. It had to be easy to store and feed out, preferably processed at harvest, similar to the barley that was being crimped, and easily grown and managed on a livestock farm. So we wanted it as high in protein as possible, so we had to put the least amount in. Store it in an outside clamp because dry sheds are always at a premium on a livestock farm, and crimping it at harvest so it was all ready to feed out in the winter. So what were the crop options? Eric was all up for having a go at growing soya, and apparently there are thousands of acres of soya grown in the south of England. However, I know of one farmer who tried it in Wales, and all he would say to me was that it was a disaster. The other thing with soya is it's a full fat grain, has a very high oil level, and you can't feed it neat to ruminants in its raw state. It has to be processed to extract the oil, and then it's the extracted soya that actually goes into ruminant feeds. Feeding high oil to ruminants means that you coat the fiber particles in the rumen, and it causes rumen upset. So soya was discarded. Then we were looking at things like beans and lupins and peas. Lupins are grown very successfully and can be crimped, but the actual yield and the gross margin you get from growing it on its own it is not great. It's about a ton and a quarter, ton and a half yield. And that is the same as well for beans and peas, really, compared to growing cereals on the same land. So I was in conversation with Roger Vickers, and he said that they'd actually tried some little trial plots growing peas and beans together. And what they found was that their growth habits are complementary. The peas actually cover the ground earlier and smother the weeds. The beans act as scaffolding for the peas as they grow. They have the same agronomy approach. Growing them together tends to synchronize the maturity of both. Mixed crops tend to produce more than when they're grown individually. And also quite important for us, if you crimp beans, then you can get air gaps between the beans because they're large particle size in the clamp. So you can't get an anaerobic condition there, which is needed to preserve it. So peas actually will fill the gaps between the large particle size of the beans. So we went to look at a bit more detail at crop agronomy required. They like free draining soil. They respond well to plentiful moisture. Roger thought they would quite like sort of wet West Wales. Roger's advice was to choose the highest yielding pea and the bean with the highest protein content to make the most of both. And he told us what establishment we should be going for. And those kind of plants per square meter are sort of growing it as a single crop. So what we were basically doing was aiming to grow two crops in the same field. They don't require any nitrogen fertilizer, big bonus at the moment. All the field had was lime and muck. And we were told just watch for chocolate spot. And we are a bit challenged in West Wales. It's not by chance that ADAS run their fungicide trials in West Wales, because that is a problem that we have. So working out the sowing rates. The PGRO have an app which is very easy to use. You can download it to your phone, and the information you need to put in is 1,000 seed weight in grams of the variety you have chosen. And you can find that information on the PGRO website. You'll see there that we've got lynx beans and Kapati peas. It wasn't the fact that we chose them because they agreed with the remit we'd be given by Roger. It was the fact that that was all that was available in West Wales at the time. So we were kind of fell into having to use those. Roger suggested that we should be going for a target population of 50 plants per square metre of beans and 70 of peas. After we'd actually planted them, Roger came back to me and said, oh, maybe in the wetter west, you can drop your beans to 40 because you will get so much growth. But actually they were already in the ground by then. So, and then it was a guess on the germination, the field losses that we'd get. And it worked out, the app worked out the seed rate we should be going for was 313 kilos of hectare of beans and 229 of the peas. And you can see there at the bottom, that is the actual seed rate of what Eirik sowed in the field. So basically it was really close to what was required. So we were told that you could sow anytime from late February. Eirik was waiting for lime to arrive, so they went in on the 22nd of April. So both crops were sown at the full sowing rate recommended for each crop. And because Eirik couldn't fit them both in the drill in one pass, that was meant 2 passes. So he sowed the beans first at 75mm depth and then the peas at 50mm. And that's a nice atmospheric shot of the Preseli Hills in the background. The field is nearly 20 acres. It's gently sloping. It's quite high. I think it's about 700 feet, Wynne was saying the other day, and quite exposed. You can see that those trees are leaning a bit. The wind comes in from Cardigan Bay, and so it wasn't a real lowland situation. So 7th of May, the plants were out of the ground and getting going. And that's a picture later on in May. We had a visit from Farmer's Guardian journalist, took a nice photo of Wynne there and Eirik, and a very good one of the dog, posing well. And that was the 24th of May. So good establishment. We did some plant counts and they were very close to what we had intended. So we had a good germination. (29th of May). And then by 7th of July, it was growing like a triffid. The crop was so thick, you couldn't walk through it apart from the tram lines. It just burst away. As you can see, 12th of July. (19th of July). Flowering nicely. And then the beans are starting to pod on the 19th of July. And loads of flowers, loads of pods. I mentioned chocolate spot. Our local agronomist came round and spotted the chocolate spot on the beans. So this was an occasion he phoned Roger, and apparently there was a new spray that had been recently approved for placing on the for using on beans. I think it was a Latus era. So, like every good agronomist, Alan came back 2 weeks later to check the results, and yes, it was definitely that it had worked well. So really, that was the only problem we had with it. We dug up some plants on the 11th of August to feature in an FCTV episode, and we're absolutely amazed to see the size and the number of these nitrogen fixing modules, which were tremendous. And I'll show you a bit later about their good work as well, how much they've done. There they are again. So we got to mid-August, and we didn't really know at that point what we were going to do regarding harvesting. We knew we had to have a crop that was between 25 and 45% moisture for crimping, but it had to be dry enough to go through the combine. Meantime, the crop had dropped to around knee height. The original plan, the advice we were given, was to use a rape swather to cut the crop down, desiccate it, and then combine. I managed to find 3 rape swathers in Pembrokeshire, but none of them were willing to come out. They were all busy being contractors and combining arable ground. They didn't have time to come and sort of deal with our problems. So we considered a drum mower, but were worried about the losses. And then we had an agronomist on the yard from Shropshire, and he said, "Oh, just go straight into it." So we were advised just to wait until the crop became slightly drier and then direct cut. We also had Andy Strelecki from Kelvin Cave, who was visiting the crop at the time as well, and his advice was very useful. Eric went and used his grain moisture meter to estimate what the dry matter was, and it was about 35% moisture, I think, when he measured it. So we were advised that we need a side knife for the combine if we're going directly into it. So Eric managed to acquire one of those. Unfortunately, the first one that arrived didn't fit, so we had to wait a bit longer. But there's the combine ready fitted with the side knife and ready to go. So it was by now the 3rd of September, and combining started. I will let Eric explain that to you, because it's beyond my knowledge. So I'll ask Eric to tell you about it at the end. That only happened the first day, I believe, on the damp conditions, or slightly damper conditions around the headland. Right, I hope this video will work now. And then that was A-rig in the combine. Now I've got a film from the outside. Oh, should have. I hope that gives you an idea of the colour of the crop, how it was going through the combine, the haulm that came out of it, because, as I say, this was the first time such a crop has been combined. So those are the peas and beans off the combine. And then they were the crimping process. And one more. Seems to like playing that twice, I don't know. Right, so the yields. It was an 8-hectare field, so we had 42 tonnes of peas and beans off it, and 176 bales of haulm. So 5.25 tonnes per hectare. And then on the costing side, we had Hevin Richards, the rumination nutritionist, coming in to do the rations, and he wanted to evaluate the crop, growing the crop from the contractor angle. So if you didn't have the equipment yourself, how much it would actually cost to sow it, plant it, spray it, harvest it, and whatever. And he also wanted to put a land rent in. On the other side of the coin, I wanted to work out how much it did actually cost A-rig to grow, so that we could work out the input from the farmer costings point of view. So the growing costs, that was everything included, from preparing the field to the pre-emergent spray, to sowing, to the 2 chocolate spot sprays, all included in there. The harvesting cost, ARIG obviously put in the same amount as what the contractor cost was judged to be. Crimping and additive, and by the way, ARIG put his fuel in as well into the growing costs. So the cost of production of a ton of the peas and beans fresh weight, but remember they were 62% dry matter, was £84 a ton from the farmer's point of view. And to compare that on equal terms with a concentrate you'd buy in, which would be 86% dry matter, that's it worked out at the same dry matter as you'd be buying in your protein concentrate. Then looking at it, doing all the contractor charges and land rent, it comes to £161 fresh weight and 223 concentrate equivalent. At the time that Heavy & Richards was doing this, he said beans were £275 a tonne, and the protein concentrate we used to buy in was over £300 a tonne, probably nearer 330 now. So quids in, especially in terms of the farmer costings. So what was their analysis? Well, they were around 62% dry matter, the whole normal kind of silage dry matter. The ME of the peas and beans was 13.6, which is very high, but you've got to remember that this is a whole product. When you buy in a protein concentrate, such as rapeseed maize distillers, it's had the readily available energy taken out of it. This is a product with nout taken out. It's a whole product, and it's got a high starch level, so 13.6 ME, which is as good as your best wheat. The haulm turned out to be somewhere between hay and silage, probably. Sorry, straw and hay, I mean. Straw is about 6.5, hay is about 8.5, so the haulm was in between the two. Then crude protein in the dry matter worked out at 26.6 for the peas and beans, 8 for the haulm, and D value, very high, digestibility, and then the haulm, again, more similar to your straw or hay. We've been asked several times, why bother with the combining of them? Why not just whole crop the whole thing? And this tells you why we haven't done that. If we'd have whole cropped it, we would have a protein level of about 12, 13, which is no better than our silage, well, worse than our silage, really. So we would have had to feed an awful lot more of it to get the protein level in the ration. So by doing it this way, we now have the option of using that as a protein concentrate and using the haulm as maybe a feed for dry cows, or using it as a straw conditioner in a beef ration. So doing the rations as a result. So Heavy & Richards has been working with us for the last 3 years. So this is this year's ration, winter ration, compared to last year's. So this year, last year we've got 1.25 kilos of protein blend in there, which is rape and maize distillers. And this year we've got 1.25 kilos of crimped peas and beans in there instead. The rest of it is depending on what the silage analysis and dry matter is, but it makes up a ration that is capable of delivering a live weight gain of nearly 1.2. You'll see the starch and sugar in this year's ration is actually a bit higher. That starch is coming from the peas and beans, as opposed to the the blend last year. The crude protein, a little bit lower. And then the cost of it, the ration this year is costing 7 pence less, 6 pence less than last year. If we look at the finishing cattle rations, the cost is actually much cheaper this year than last year. £2.18 compared to £2.39 last year. So again, we've got last year 1.5 kilos of blend in there. This year we've got 1.25 kilos of the peas and beans, giving a ration of equal protein, starch and sugar just about the same, and the predicted live weight gain is 1.4 kilos a day. ARIG has weighed some cattle that sort of 550 kilos, and he reported that they're doing 1.5 kilos a day. So the ration is definitely working, if anything, better than the ration we had last year. So looking at the overall cost savings, that's cost per head per day. If you look at an animal sort of coming into the shed in November, being fed on for 5 months on the growing ration, and then 3 months on the finishing ration, this is the cost savings based on 200 cattle. So it is quite significant when you add those up. Then the story is not quite over yet. So coming back to these little nuggets of gold, every one of our demonstration farms has had a LoRaWAN gateway fitted. A LoRaWAN gateway enables sensors to be connected to it, and it's a free, unlicensed gateway that can be used by anyone. It's the data that you collect with it is then relayed via the internet to wherever, and can be you can actually monitor and analyze things in real time. And the first winter we actually used the gateway to look at the area in the cattle shed. Pantyderi got 2 big span buildings, and the wean calves were due to go into a pen in that shed in November. So we started, before they went in, we had temperature and humidity sensors up above that pen, and we were surprised to see how high the humidity levels were. They were quite often in excess of 95%. So in view of the fact that on the other side of the feed passage were all brought in cattle, and the prevailing wind was coming from the direction of the larger cattle and towards where the weaned calves were supposed to go, we decided not to put them in that shed, and they went into a shed on another farm. And apparently, whereas normally they would have had some problem with pneumonia, they didn't have any in their dedicated shed on the other farm. So it's an example of the LoRaWAN gateway and sensors, which are very cheap to buy, actually delivering useful results. But moving on to the pea and bean field, the peas and beans came off in early September. Middle of September, winter wheat was planted, and this is the 28th of October. And you can see that the crop is looking very well. That contraption there is a nitrate sensor, and there's also a temperature and moisture sensor there. There's 3 sets of those in the field. I spent a couple of years trying to track down some nitrate sensors, and eventually listening to an HDB webinar on cover crops, found there was an Innovate UK project running with the John Innes Centre in Norwich, and contacted them, and the upshot of it was that they let us have some free nitrate sensors as long as they could follow our journey with the LoRaWAN gateway, because they hadn't used it in conjunction with a LoRaWAN gateway before. They were going to the field with a laptop and actually downloading the results. So they were very interested to see how the LoRaWAN application would work. So that is the sensor, and these are the results that it is putting out, the 3 sets of them. So we've got one at the top, one in the middle, and one at the bottom. And what has really surprised us is that since they've gone in, which was at the end of October, they have been, 2 of them have been just around the 100 parts per million level all the way through. There doesn't seem to have been any leaching. We're not sure if the soil mineralization of nitrogen is keeping it in equilibrium. We assume the crop hasn't had too much demand through the autumn. The crop is looking very well at the moment, but the advice is from Tony Miller at the John Innes Centre is that not to go on with any nitrogen, and this field hasn't had any nitrogen in over 2 years, no fertilizer at all. So the John Innes Centre were really surprised to see those levels as well. All they will say is that they're high. We don't really know what to expect. The bottom sensor there, we're not quite sure whether it might be a stone or something lodged against the sensor, and it's not registering such high levels. Last Friday, I took some soil samples from around the 3 sensors and sent them away to for calibration purposes. So we'll see whether that is genuinely a lower level, or do we need to actually replace that sensor. So very, very interesting work. And as I say, we don't really know how to interpret it properly yet, but we've been told not to go on with fertilizer until those levels drop by 20%. So that's what we're working towards at the moment. So that feeds into some really nice figures on carbon footprint for what we're doing. In exactly a month today, Farming Connect will have a stand at the low carbon event at Stoneleigh Park. And this project, along with 2 others from the Farming Connect demo network, will be featured. So by not purchasing 40 tons of protein concentrate, and I've got these figures of 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per ton from figures for a 50% rate, 50% maize distillers mix into a feed mill. So that's where the 1.5 tons comes from, and it's actually a quoted figure. So we've saved 40 tons, so that's 60 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that we've saved by growing our own protein. And then the fertilizer carbon savings for use by the following winter wheat crop, we're estimating it to be about 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, which works out at 2.32 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, and that has a figure of 3.4 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of N. So we've saved 2.72 tons there as well. And on top of that, just in this one field, about 2.3 tons of ammonium nitrate at current prices is a fertilizer cost saving of £1,508. So it's win-win-win situation, really. It's ticked an awful lot of boxes. So that is the presentation bit done. I'm now going to invite Eirik to come online, and you are free to ask him questions on any practical points, like how we found combining it and whatever. I'll just open up the questions. Keep your questions coming in. The first one is, what pH of soil do they require? I believe it's sort of over 6 and about 6.2 if possible. So Eirik was quite careful to make sure that the pH of the field was right, wasn't it, Eirik?
Yeah. We did it with variable rate. So I think the field only needed about 10 ton of lime or something across the whole lot. So it didn't need a lot to get it up to 6.5. So yeah, that worked all right.
Good. Would you like just to say about the combined sieves? I'll pass that one on to you while I remember.
Yeah, the sieves, well, they obviously blocked. If you're a combine driver, you're probably wondering, it's probably a nightmare of a crop to combine, but it wasn't that bad really, at all. I managed to get the headland off, and then I had to clean the sieves out. So take them all out, clean them all down, put them back in again, and I did the rest of the field then without any blockages at all. So it was pretty straightforward. The only thing setting up the combine then is just open the concave right up, slow the drum speed down, increase the fan speed right up, and just take it easy really. So yeah, it was it wasn't as bad as what you'd expect then, but it went quite well. I was quite pleased with it.
I know there was one combine man that said, "Oh, I wouldn't take my nice new combine into a crop like that." But when you looked at the holm coming out the back, it didn't look that sort of stiff and hard. It was quite malleable, wasn't it? It wasn't. What kind of effect did it have on your combine?
Yeah, it went through easy enough. Yes, okay. When you're harvesting going into the combine was easy, but obviously when it starts to thresh, it starts to create a lot of moisture. So then, yeah, as it goes through the sieves, then it does collect a bit of moisture on the sieves. But as it's coming out the back, then there was very few losses, and it was threshing quite well. So I was very happy with it. Very happy with it, really. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a question here. What was the losses through the combine? As you say, you couldn't see too much. I mean, there were some volunteers that turned up in the field, but one thing Eirik did do was turn his lambs in after combining. So they polished up some of the stuff that was spilt on the surface.
Yeah, nothing went to waste. No.
Yes. Right. What is the nutritional value of the holm as a feed fibre, or is it only suitable for use as bedding? I think I said it's sort of between straw and hay with regards its energy level, and probably nearer hay for its protein level. I did think, oh, this will be a nice feed for dry suckler cows because it would kind of fill them up and keep them happy. But Eirik reports that, yeah, go on, Eirik. You said you tried it with the suckler cows, and what happened?
Yeah, they didn't like the bale. Just putting the bale in there hole into a silage rack or something. But that's what we did then. We just put it through the TMR and mixed it in with the ration instead of the straw. So you're saving on straw as well. So that worked well. Of course, it's chopped up. We baled it and chopped it and put additive on top of it. And then yeah, just put it through the TMR then. Worked well. It chops it up quite fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and the beef cattle, they don't seem to be leaving it as the dry cows were, because it's
No,
got
oh no. Sorry, yeah, no, they're not leaving it. Not through the TMR, but yeah, when you were giving them a whole bale, yeah, they didn't. They weren't keen on it. They weren't keen on that. No, but having it chopped through with the diet, you don't really see it really, but it's there. But it's they eat it quite well then.
Mhm. Good, nothing goes to waste anyway. So it's all being fully used. Yeah, I didn't mention that with the Holden bales, what we did was put a value on them. I think it was about £15 a ton. Then we subtracted the cost of the baling, and they had additive because there was a bit of sort of mold on the stems, and we were advised to put additive on it to protect the bales. So taking off all that, it came back to about £10 a bale, and then that was credited towards the cost of making the peas and beans concentrate. So yeah, why crimp and not dry combine? I think that the answer to that is, well, it's a livestock farm. They crimp their barley already, and you can just put it with preservative. It had crimp safe, was it?
Yeah, crimp safe. Yeah, is a preservative. Yeah.
When it went into the clamp, so it meant you could store it just in a clamp outside, like you would silage, and cover it with a sheet. Then because it's treated with preservative, you don't have to worry about it. You come to feed it out in the winter, all you do is take your front end loader in there and put it into your mixer wagon. If it was dry combined, you'd have to have specialist facilities for keeping it in that condition. Also, you'd have to wait probably until would the peas and beans actually mature at the same time as far as dry combining goes. With crimping, it doesn't matter so much if they're not quite at the same stage. Yeah, anything you want to add to that, Eric? You wouldn't find it so easy, I suppose, to actually dry combine, because again, it's a storage bit, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the system we've got is suited to crimping really. So you just get the loadle, and the way you clamp it, yeah, you just get the bucket and put it in and put it straight into the TMR. So the milling is done. So we find it a lot easier doing it like that. But whereas if you were to dry it, you'd have to probably store it somewhere a bit better than where it is now, or even outside. So yeah.
And also you'd have to mill it really before you fed it then, wouldn't you? If it was dry combined, and it's dry peas and beans tend to go to dust if you mill them. So yeah, it really wouldn't be such a nice feed in that case. Did you have to wrap the bales?
Yes, yeah, wrap the bale. Not any more wrap than you would put on silage. I don't know how many wraps go on the bale, I can't remember, but yeah, just wrap them, chop them, chop a baler then and wrap them. Yes. Yeah.
Right. How does it fit in within the rotation? When you calculate carbon cost, do you factor release of soil carbon due to cultivation? Well, I have to put up my hand for that second bit, because it's a partial budget that we've done here with the carbon footprint. But Eirig has an arable rotation anyway, so if he had not grown the peas and beans there, it probably would have gone into cereals, which would have been needing cultivation anyway. The whole farm system relies on growing barley to feed the cattle, so something like this really fits in the rotation absolutely beautifully when you see the benefits that are coming out of it in terms of nitrogen fixing nodules and how much you're saving in nitrogen for the following wheat crop. You know, it really does suit someone who's growing a bit of arable alongside the grass-based farm. Yeah, anything you want to say, Eirig?
Yeah, normally after the peas and beans, we put wheat in, winter wheat in, so it worked well with the rotation in regards to that. Yeah, it fits in well with us, the peas and beans, and I'm hoping to put more in this year now. So yeah.
That's the crux of the matter, isn't it? You ask him, is he going to do it again? And he did actually say the other day he's actually growing more acres this year, because what would be really nice to try is to feed peas and beans to sheep instead of soya or soprolin, along with high quality silage, because this is like a complete feed on its own. You know, it's got the energy, it's got the starch, it's got good quality protein, it's got limiting amino acids in it. And we do need to find an alternative to soprolin and soya, which is traveling from the other side of the world. So I'm not saying we're going to accomplish it next winter at Pantyderi, but it's definitely something for someone to consider if they're already doing a complete diet with a bit of soprolin and high quality silage. And apparently you can feed it to non-ruminants as well, pigs and poultry, but I'm not a non-ruminant nutritionist, so you'd have to ask someone else about that. Another question, can such a crop be sown at a lower rate with grass seeds, mowed, baled and wrapped, and fed to young cattle as a protein supplement in winter alongside grass silage, but also having the nitrogen fixing benefits for grass establishment, reducing bought-in protein and nitrogen? Interesting one. Mowed, baled and wrapped. I suppose that could be done. Fed to young cattle as a protein supplement. You would probably end up with something more like whole crop though. So whole crop would be lower in protein altogether, because you've got the whole in there as well. So instead of looking at something that's 27% crude protein, it would only be like 12-13% protein. But I can see you're trying to go for the nitrogen fixing benefits as well, which maybe clover would suit that kind of situation you're talking about better than putting peas and beans in it, because clovers do the same thing, being a legume as well. Right, would you be able to bale and feed to sheep without processing? Bale and feed.
Probably,
again,
I think maybe if you were to mow the crop, you might have a bit more losses if you were to do that.
Yeah,
maybe.
quite right. And
But
again,
you could do it, yeah.
it would be more like a sort of the whole, more like a whole crop then, wouldn't it? So you wouldn't get such a high protein level. Yeah. Sheep need very high density rations in the period up to lambing. That's the only time you feed them really. So maybe whole crop wouldn't be the most appropriate in that situation, but definitely the grain would be really useful. Someone's commented that probably the grass mix would be overtaken by the peas. Yes, probably would.
Yeah.
The peas grew like triffids.
Yeah, they overtake the weeds. So.
Yes, she was the idea. Right. I think we've done those. Right. Any more? Yeah. Done. Right. Right. And that. So. Right. Any more questions coming in? So have you actually booked your seed for this year, Eric? Because I'm getting concerned that the seed has become more popular now.
Yes, no, I haven't booked it yet, but I will be this week now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Will you
No,
go for the same as last year, or will you?
Yeah, we'll put in 30 acres this year now, and yeah, I'll do exactly what I did this year now, but on a slightly larger scale. So yeah, no, it works well with the TMR and everything, fattening the cattle, everything about it. It's especially with the fertilizer costs now, the carbon footprinting and all that. So yeah, it's ticking all the boxes, and it's something you can grow at home relatively cheap compared to buying like a protein diet in. So yeah.
And is there anything you will do differently this year compared to what you did last year?
Probably sow them a bit earlier. Try and get off them. Try to get them off a bit earlier. Other than that, no, I don't think it'd be anything differently. Just I'll know how to combine it a bit more prepared about how to go about combining it. But that wasn't an issue really anyway. But no, I think it's all good. It's all. It was a good crop to grow. I'm quite happy with it.
Good. We've got a comment here from Michael Carpenter of Kelvin Cave, the crimping people. In answer to your question, I'm working with a farmer in Norfolk who has had good results baling whole crop forage peas, and I would happily send you analysis and details. So yeah, that's an option instead of sowing grass under it, but baling whole crop forage peas. Doesn't say good results in relation to what animals they're being fed to, but yeah, if you would send us the analysis and details, then you can certainly pass that information on to whoever's asking. Thank you, Michael. Right, we have gone beyond our allocated time frame of 1 hour. So unless you're very quick with another question, I am going to draw the meeting to an end. I would like to thank Eirik very much for his contribution tonight, but also for being brave enough to try a 20-acre field of something that no one else has grown before, and for being willing to take his combine where no combine has gone before. So without our demo farmers being willing to come on board with us and carrying out this work, then we wouldn't have such interesting results to offer you. Thanks also to David, our Zoom facilitator, working in the background tonight. And thank you to all of you for your interest in our work and participating tonight. So I hope you all have a good growing season, and I'll wish you a good night. Diolch yn fawr a nos da i chi gyd.
Os da?
Nos da.
Well,